Conception Bay South, Newfoundland, was quiet in the early hours of July 30th, 2016. Most residents were asleep, unaware that a violent crime was about to unfold in their community. Stephen Miller, a 25-year-old man, was at home in his modest house on the main highway. Known for being friendly, hardworking, and dedicated to his family, Stephen had a college diploma and a stable job as a millwright. That night, however, a group of men with criminal histories from nearby St. John's and Paradise had set their sights on him. The intruders planned a robbery, targeting cash and drugs. Masked and armed, they arrived at Stephen's house around 4 a.m., and the quiet summer morning erupted into chaos. Stephen's brother's girlfriend, asleep in another room, was woken by loud noises and shouting. She witnessed 3 men confront Stephen inside his home, recognizing the attackers from the neighborhood. Despite Stephen trying to defend himself, the situation quickly became dangerous. During the struggle, Stephen was forcibly removed from the house. The men made the decision to take him away, claiming they would get help, while one of the intruders stayed behind. Chesley Lucas set fire to the living room, using gasoline he had brought with him, creating a terrifying scene. Outside, flames began to engulf the house, alerting neighbors and police to the emergency. In those few minutes, what began as a robbery escalated into a life-threatening assault. Stephen Miller was taken from his home while the property burned behind him. That night shattered the sense of safety in the community and set off a massive chain of events. The police would soon be faced with a complex investigation, spanning multiple locations, multiple suspects, and a timeline filled with lies and confusion. By the early morning, emergency calls reached the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, reporting both a home fire and a man in distress. The response would become one of the largest and most detailed murder investigations in the province's recent history. Stephen's life hung in the balance, and the night's events would leave a lasting impact on his family, friends, and the entire community. This was the beginning of a case that would expose drug-related violence, a botched home invasion, and a series of desperate acts by a group of young men that spiraled completely out of control. The stage was set for an investigation that would reveal shocking truths and ultimately seek justice for Stephen Miller. By the early hours of July 30th, 2016, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, or RNC, had arrived at Stephen Miller's burning home. Firefighters worked quickly to contain the blaze, while officers began taking statements from witnesses, including Stephen's brother's girlfriend, who described the intruders and the sequence of events inside the house. Investigators immediately realized they were dealing with a home invasion, assault, arson, and likely a homicide. The scale of the crime required a full, coordinated response. Within hours, police received disturbing news. Stephen's body had been discovered in a driveway miles away in the Bayview Heights neighborhood. The location seemed random, suggesting the attackers had left him where he would not be easily found. Paramedics confirmed that he had succumbed to the injuries sustained during the struggle at his home. The investigators now faced the challenge of connecting multiple crime scenes: the burned house, the driveway where Stephen was found, and later, the locations where the perpetrators had fled. The RNC quickly began piecing together the timeline. 2 suspects, Paul Connolly and Calvin Kenny, had been injured during the struggle and were found at different locations. Connolly was discovered unconscious on a street in Paradise with stab wounds, while Kenny made a call to 911 from Stephen Miller's phone, giving false information about the location. Officers noted discrepancies in their statements and began focusing on the fact that their alibis did not match the sequence of events. Forensics teams collected evidence from the burned house, including a buck knife with traces of blood. DNA and fingerprints would later play a critical role in linking the suspects to the crime. The investigation also involved locating the 4th suspect, Chesley C.J. Lucas, who had fled Newfoundland for Nova Scotia. Police issued a Canada-wide warrant and coordinated with authorities in Halifax. On August 9th, 2 weeks after the attack, officers arrested Lucas at a downtown restaurant without incident. The suspect was cooperative initially, allowing investigators to gather more information about his role in the crime. In addition to physical evidence, investigators interviewed neighbors, family, and associates of the suspects. Surveillance footage and cell phone records helped establish the movements of all 4 men during the night of the attack. The RNC's work was painstaking, requiring hundreds of hours to ensure that the facts were accurately documented. By combining witness testimony, forensic evidence, and digital data, investigators gradually reconstructed the night's chaotic events. As the pieces came together, the authorities realized the attack had been a botched robbery, gone tragically wrong. They identified the roles of each perpetrator: Paul Connolly and Calvin Kenny as the main attackers, Chesley Lucas as the instigator of the fire, and Kyle Morgan as the getaway driver. All 4 men were connected through prior criminal records and known associations. The public was warned that the suspects were dangerous, and community members remained on edge as the investigation unfolded. By the end of the first week, all suspects were either in custody or actively being pursued, and charges were prepared. The RNC's methodical approach would later be credited with preventing further violence and ensuring that each individual involved was held accountable. The investigation set the stage for the complex legal proceedings that would follow as prosecutors prepared to present a case built on overwhelming evidence, eyewitness accounts, and forensic proof. After the arrests of Paul Connolly, Calvin Kenny, Chesley C.J. Lucas, and Kyle Morgan, the legal proceedings began in earnest. Court appearances started in late August 2016, with all 4 men facing charges including first-degree murder, forcible confinement, robbery, and arson. The complexity of the case, combined with the multiple crime scenes and number of suspects, meant the trials would be long and closely watched by both the media and the public. Kyle Morgan, the youngest of the group and the getaway driver, became the first to enter a plea. Recognizing his limited role in the events, he pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact to manslaughter. In March 2017, he was sentenced to 1 year in jail, with credit for time served during pretrial detention. While his sentence was relatively light, it reflected the court's assessment of his minor role in the overall attack. The 2 main attackers, Calvin Kenny and Chesley Lucas, faced more serious consequences. Both men initially pleaded guilty to manslaughter, rather than first-degree murder. Prosecutors recommended a sentence of 7.5 years, but the judge deemed it too lenient, emphasizing the severity of the crime and its impact on the victim's family. In May 2017, the judge imposed a significantly harsher sentence of 12.5 years in prison for each man. Their attempts to withdraw the guilty pleas were denied, and the sentence was later upheld on appeal, reinforcing the court's position on the gravity of their actions. Paul Connolly, with a long history of criminal activity, also pleaded guilty to manslaughter. His sentence of 10.5 years reflected both his direct involvement in the attack and his prior record. During sentencing, Connolly addressed the court, offering an apology to Stephen Miller's family for the pain he had caused, stating, "I am affected by this. It did change me, and I'm going to show that as I live my life in the future." His statement, while brief, acknowledged the human cost of the crime. The legal process also examined the circumstances of the night itself, including the planning and execution of the home invasion, the fight inside the house, and the subsequent abduction. Evidence presented in court included witness testimony, DNA results from the knife in the crime scene, surveillance footage, and 911 call recordings. Prosecutors emphasized that the attack was premeditated to a degree, but spiraled violently out of control, demonstrating both recklessness and extreme disregard for human life. Sentencing hearings were emotionally charged. Family members of Stephen Miller attended each proceeding, seeking accountability and justice. During one hearing, a family member publicly expressed anger and sorrow, highlighting the lasting trauma caused by the crime. The court proceedings were transparent and thorough, ensuring that the public could witness the pursuit of justice while preserving the integrity of the trial. In addition to incarceration, the court considered factors such as rehabilitation potential, risk to the public, and the deterrent effect of the sentences. Judges consistently emphasized the importance of sending a clear message that violent crimes, especially those resulting from pre-planned robberies and reckless behavior, would be met with serious consequences. By the conclusion of the trials, all 4 men had received sentences commensurate with their actions and involvement. The legal system had navigated a complex case involving multiple suspects, conflicting accounts, and high public attention. While the sentences could not reverse the loss of Stephen Miller, they represented the culmination of months of diligent police work, careful investigation, and judicial oversight. Following the sentencing of Calvin Kenny, Chesley Lucas, Paul Connolly, and Kyle Morgan, the community of Conception Bay South began to grapple with the aftermath of the crime. The violence had left a permanent scar in the neighborhood, and residents were acutely aware of how quickly a seemingly ordinary night had turned into tragedy. Local authorities and social services worked to provide support for Stephen Miller's family, helping them navigate the emotional fallout and the ongoing public attention surrounding the case. Inside the prison system, the lives of the perpetrators also took dramatic turns. Calvin Kenny, serving his 12-and-a-half-year sentence, faced significant challenges adapting to life behind bars. On February 25th, 2019, Kenny was fatally stabbed by another inmate at the Atlantic Institution in New Brunswick. Reports indicate that the attack was carried out by a fellow prisoner who accused Kenny of being a gang leader and threatening others. His death mirrored the violent life he had led outside prison and underscored the risks of incarceration for high-risk offenders. Chesley Lucas and Paul Connolly continued serving their sentences. Lucas remained in a maximum security facility where his behavior was closely monitored due to his central role in the attack. Connolly, despite having apologized to Stephen Miller's family during sentencing, had to adjust to a controlled environment that strictly limited personal freedoms and required ongoing compliance with institutional rules. Kyle Morgan, having served his 1-year sentence, was released and returned to civilian life, carrying the weight of witnessing the tragic consequences of the home invasion. The fire that had destroyed Stephen Miller's house was demolished just over a month after the attack, erasing the physical site of the crime but leaving behind a profound emotional void for the community. Neighbors, friends, and local organizations rallied to provide assistance and commemorate Stephen's life, highlighting the importance of community resilience in the face of such violence. Memorials and vigils were held, allowing residents to collectively mourn and reflect on the events that had shaken their town. The Royal Newfoundland Constabulary reviewed the events leading to Stephen Miller's death, noting areas where rapid response and forensic work had been crucial in identifying and apprehending the suspects. While the investigation had been swift and ultimately effective, it reinforced lessons about the dangers of unplanned criminal activity escalating into lethal violence. Police officers involved in the case were recognized for their coordination and persistence in bringing the perpetrators to justice. Community programs focused on youth crime prevention gained attention after the case, emphasizing the risks of involvement in gangs, drug-related activities, and violent crime. The story of Stephen Miller was cited as an example in educational and law enforcement discussions, illustrating how ordinary people could become entangled in criminal acts with devastating results. Family members of Stephen Miller became advocates for crime awareness, speaking publicly about the dangers of drugs, peer pressure, and risky behavior. Their efforts helped promote conversations about personal safety, early intervention, and the importance of community vigilance in preventing tragedies. Even years after the crime, the memory of that night in July 2016 continued to shape the lives of those involved and the wider community. While justice had been served in the courts, the emotional and social impact of the attack lingered, serving as a reminder of the fragility of safety and the enduring consequences of violent crime. Years after the tragic murder of Stephen Miller, the community of Conception Bay South continues to remember the young man whose life was cut short on July 30th, 2016. Memorials and tributes keep his memory alive, reminding residents of the fragility of life and the consequences of violence. Friends and family often speak about Stephen as a kind, generous, and spirited person, highlighting how his absence has left an irreplaceable void in the town. The case also left a lasting impact on the criminal justice system in Newfoundland. Law enforcement agencies examined the sequence of events, noting both the challenges and successes of the investigation. The rapid coordination between the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary and other agencies was praised, but the case also reinforced the importance of proper planning and awareness of potential dangers during violent incidents. The trial process and sentencing demonstrated the complexities of dealing with multiple offenders, plea bargains, and the balance between punishment and public confidence in justice. Stephen Miller's family has worked tirelessly to transform their grief into advocacy. They have spoken publicly about the dangers of drug-related crime, emphasizing prevention and education for youth in the province. Their message focuses on making young people aware of how quickly criminal activity can escalate and the life-changing consequences that can follow. Community organizations have partnered with families to run programs aimed at reducing gang involvement and encouraging safe decision-making among teenagers and young adults. The violent deaths and prison experiences of the perpetrators also serve as cautionary tales. Calvin Kenny's murder in prison in February 2019 was widely covered in the media, showing how violent behavior outside the law can carry over into incarceration. The sentences of Chesley Lucas and Paul Connolly demonstrate that the justice system can deliver accountability, though it cannot undo the trauma experienced by victims' families. These outcomes highlight the far-reaching consequences of crime, both for those who commit it and those who are affected by it. In schools, workplaces, and public forums across Newfoundland, Stephen Miller's story is frequently cited as an example of the dangers of unplanned criminal activity and the devastating ripple effects that follow. It has inspired conversations about community safety, personal responsibility, and the importance of support networks in preventing crime. The case has also influenced local policy discussions on youth engagement, gang prevention, and interventions for at-risk individuals. Despite the tragedy, there are moments of hope. Friends and family remember Stephen for his vibrant personality, his love of music, and his dedication to those around him. Local residents continue to honor him through memorials and acts of service, ensuring that his story does not fade from collective memory. His life, though tragically short, continues to influence positive change and community awareness. The Stephen Miller case also serves as a reminder that even in small, tight-knit communities, violence can erupt unexpectedly. It underscores the importance of vigilance, early intervention, and support systems for both potential victims and those at risk of committing crimes. Policymakers, educators, and law enforcement continue to reflect on the lessons of this case in shaping safety initiatives and prevention strategies. Finally, the legacy of Stephen Miller is one of caution, remembrance, and community resilience. While his family will always mourn him, their advocacy, along with the ongoing memory of his life, ensures that the story of that summer night in July 2016 continues to educate, warn, and inspire change. The tragedy serves as both a stark warning and a call to action for communities across Newfoundland and beyond to work together to prevent such senseless violence from ever happening again. The village of Mayo sits in the heart of the Yukon, surrounded by long stretches of forest, winding rivers, and quiet gravel roads that seem to run endlessly into the wilderness. It is a place with fewer than 300 residents, where people grow up knowing their neighbors for generations, and where most daily life happens within a few familiar streets. Winter lingers for months, bringing bitter cold, long nights, and a slow, steady pace that people in the far north have learned to live with. Violent crime is rare, and when it does occur, it usually comes from disputes that are quickly resolved within the community. The feeling of calm, combined with the isolation, creates a sense of safety that many residents rely on. That sense of safety began to crack during early 2023 as concerns about rising crime and drug activity spread across the First Nation of Nachonyakdun. Community leaders had been warning that the territory was facing serious issues connected to addiction, outside influences, and escalating violence. Local officials described seeing more unfamiliar people passing through the area, more reports of suspicious activity, and growing anxiety among families who feared the territory was changing faster than they could adjust. Elders and community advocates noted that residents were becoming more cautious, avoiding walking alone at night and keeping a closer eye on their homes. Even before the double homicide, people in Mayo said the atmosphere felt different, heavier, and more unsettled than in previous years. On a cold weekend in early March of 2023, that underlying tension would give way to something far more alarming. In the days leading up to the tragedy, residents went about their routines as usual, unaware that two men from Whitehorse, more than 300 kilometers to the south, had traveled north and arrived quietly in the area. Their presence did not draw attention, and there were no public warnings or alerts suggesting anything unusual was happening. To the people of Mayo, it was simply another quiet weekend in a remote northern town. But in the early hours of Saturday, the calm that had defined the community for generations would be shattered. A series of noises, faint but distinct in the cold air, drifted through the C6 subdivision, a residential area on the traditional lands of the First Nation of Nachonyakdun. Some residents woke briefly, unsure if the sounds were fireworks, machinery, or something else entirely. Most went back to sleep, never suspecting they had heard the first sign of a tragedy that would eventually place Mayo at the center of one of the Yukon's most troubling unsolved cases. By sunrise that morning, the community remained unaware of what had taken place. Daily life continued, and the cold northern air carried on with its usual stillness. But behind that quiet, the events of the night had already set in motion a series of discoveries, investigations, and unanswered questions that would soon shake the Yukon and leave a lasting mark on the people of Mayo. On the morning of March 11th, 2023, the quiet in Mayo was broken by a call to police at 9:13 a.m. that alerted officers to a terrible scene on a residential road in the C6 subdivision. Earlier that pre-dawn, around 5 a.m., several people reported hearing gunshots in the area. At first, some assumed they were fireworks, but the sounds were later linked to the violence investigators would uncover. RCMP patrols arrived quickly and secured the scene, while the Yukon RCMP Major Crime Unit was mobilized to take over the investigation. Forensic teams worked through the cold morning and into the day, methodically photographing the area, collecting evidence, and mapping the scene so nothing was missed. The two men found on the roadway were identified by police as 35-year-old Benjamin Symington and 22-year-old Michael Bennett, both from Whitehorse. A 2010 Ford Escape, connected to the men, was recovered at the scene and removed for forensic examination and tracing. Witness statements and early forensic analysis suggested the men had been killed some hours before their bodies were discovered, which guided investigators in building an initial timeline. As officers combed for leads, the focus was on locating any vehicle or person seen in the area overnight and preserving fragile evidence in the harsh northern climate. Once the Yukon RCMP Major Crime Unit took command of the scene, detectives set out to reconstruct the final hours of Benjamin Symington and Michael Bennett. Officers confirmed that the two men had been seen in the Mayo area late on Friday, March 10th, or in the early hours of Saturday before the murders. but the exact reason for their trip remained unclear. Investigators canvassed the community, speaking with residents, reviewing CCTV where available, and tracking the Ford escape to understand the men's movements leading up to the discovery. Despite these efforts, early leads were slow to develop, and identifying anyone connected to the road that night proved difficult in the vast rural landscape. The RCMP appealed publicly for information, asking anyone who had seen the vehicle or the men to come forward, emphasizing that even small details could be vital. Tension grew in the community as more people became aware that lives had been taken in a place where violent crime was virtually unheard of. Within days, the First Nation of Nahchonyakdun declared a state of emergency in response to escalating concerns about crime and safety in the region, reflecting broader issues that extended beyond this single incident. Meanwhile, the Major Crime Unit continued to follow every tip, interview witnesses, and analyze forensic findings in hopes of identifying a suspect or motive. The investigation revealed more complexity than initially expected, but no arrests were made, and no clear suspect had emerged, leaving investigators frustrated and searching for new avenues of inquiry. As weeks turned into months after the March 11th, 2023 discovery, the Yukon RCMP continued efforts to solve the Mayo double homicide. But one challenge repeatedly stood in their way: a deep silence within the community. Investigators strongly believed that people who lived in and around the area had seen or heard details that could help the case, yet few came forward with substantial information. RCMP officials publicly acknowledged that cooperation was essential to making progress and repeatedly asked residents to speak with police, even anonymously. The atmosphere in Mayo shifted as residents remained cautious, reluctant to discuss their knowledge or suspicions openly, especially in a tight-knit environment where everyone knows each other. In April of 2025, more than 2 years after the murders, the RCMP issued an updated public plea, emphasizing that individuals choosing not to cooperate were slowing the path to justice. Investigators also released information about a vehicle of interest, a large truck equipped with a light bar, seen near the scene of the crime on the morning of the killings, urging anyone with details on that vehicle or its driver to come forward. Despite these renewed appeals and the effort poured into interviews, forensic analysis, and tip follow-ups, the case remained unresolved. The persistent lack of actionable leads kept the investigation in a state of slow, careful work as officers continued combing through what little information they had in search of a break. By the time the investigation moved into its third year, the Mayo double homicide had become one of the Yukon's most unsettling unsolved cases. RCMP investigators continued to revisit evidence collected since March 11th, 2023, reviewing every forensic detail, rechecking timelines, and re-interviewing individuals connected to the victims or the area near the homicide scene. Specialized units from across Canada remained involved, offering advanced analytical support to ensure no piece of information was overlooked. Officers maintained that the case was absolutely solvable, stressing that even a single overlooked detail from a resident could be the turning point. Throughout 2024 and 2025, police released several renewed public appeals, carefully choosing language that balanced urgency with respect for the close-knit community. These appeals emphasized that investigators believed key information existed locally, information that, if shared, could finally identify the person or persons responsible. As of the most recent update, RCMP confirmed that the investigation remains active and ongoing, with no suspects publicly named and no arrests made. The case stands as a painful reminder of how deeply violence can impact a small northern community, and how justice sometimes depends on the courage of those willing to come forward with what they know. On the evening of Friday, September 1st, 1972, downtown Montreal was alive with the feeling of a long weekend just beginning. Warm air drifted through Union Street, where the Bluebird Cafe and its upstairs bar, the Wagon Wheel, offered music, dancing, and a familiar escape for many young people. Country and Western music echoed from the second floor, a sound that had become part of the bar's identity. For regular visitors, the Wagon Wheel felt like a second home, especially for the English-speaking working-class crowd who gathered there every week. It was a place where friendships were made, birthdays were celebrated, and couples often returned to remember where their stories first began. That night, more than 200 patrons filled the second-floor bar. Some were celebrating the end of summer, while others were simply out for a relaxing night with friends. Among them were young adults who worked nearby, couples who had met there, and groups who made the Wagon Wheel their usual Friday night destination. The building itself was older, constructed long before modern safety standards existed, but most people inside likely never imagined that the layout or design could become a danger. Inside the bar, the atmosphere was upbeat. A live band played on stage, adding energy to the crowded room. Drinks were served steadily as people gathered around small tables or danced to the music. Patrons laughed, talked, and enjoyed the final stretch of warm weather before autumn arrived. There was no sign that the night would become anything other than what it had always been for the Wagon Wheel: loud, crowded, predictable, and comforting. Outside on Union Street, late-night traffic moved slowly past the entrance, and the glow of neon signs reflected on the pavement. At street level, the Bluebird Cafe offered its own small crowd, separate from the larger group upstairs. The only direct route between the outside world and the Wagon Wheel was a wooden staircase leading to the second-floor entrance. For years, it had served thousands of visitors without issue. To those who used it night after night, it was simply part of the building, nothing more. But even as the night felt ordinary, small moments were already aligning that would later reveal the fragility of the scene. Patrons were unaware of weaknesses in the building's design and safety features, unaware of how quickly a situation could change if something went wrong. The bar's capacity was high, the room was tightly packed, and escape routes were limited. None of these details stood out at the time. They were just accepted parts of a familiar space. What no one inside could have known was that nearby, 3 young men were also part of the evening's story. Their arrival, their frustration, and their actions in the minutes ahead would transform an ordinary Friday night into one of Quebec's most devastating tragedies. Without warning, the night that began with music and laughter was about to take a path no one could have imagined. As the evening continued inside the Wagon Wheel, events on the street below took a very different turn. 3 young men, Gilles Eccles, James O'Brien, and Jean-Marc Boutin, arrived outside the building with plans to meet friends already inside the upstairs bar. They'd been drinking heavily earlier in the night, and their intoxication was immediately noticeable. When they attempted to enter the Wagon Wheel, the doorman refused them because of their condition. It was a routine decision made countless times in nightlife settings, but for the 3 men, the refusal felt like a personal insult. Their intense anger escalated quickly. Instead of walking away, they became determined to retaliate. Later, during official statements, they would claim that their goal was to frighten the doorman and cause enough disruption to get him in trouble with the bar's management. They insisted that they did not intend to harm the people inside, but even without intending to cause mass casualties, their next actions were reckless and incredibly dangerous. In their frustration, they left the area briefly and drove to a nearby gas station. There, they filled a small container with gasoline, a decision made impulsively and without any understanding of the consequences that would follow. Once they had the gasoline, they returned to Union Street and parked close to the entrance of the building. Their plan was simple in their own minds: start a small fire on the wooden staircase leading to the Wagon Wheel, create panic, and humiliate the doorman. The staircase they targeted was the only standard entrance and exit for the second-floor bar. Anyone who wanted to enter or leave the Wagon Wheel had to use those steps. The men did not stop to consider what would happen if the staircase became impassable. The age of the building, the flammable materials, and the crowded conditions inside were all factors they ignored entirely. Two of the men approached the staircase, while the third stayed back. They poured the gasoline along the wooden steps, soaking the primary access point to the bar above. When one of them struck a match, the fire ignited instantly. The staircase was dry, narrow, and enclosed, enough that the flames spread with terrifying speed. What they had imagined as a brief scare became a rapidly growing blaze. Inside the bar, a faint odor of gasoline reached some of the patrons, but before anyone could react, heat and smoke began pushing upward. Within moments, the fire had cut off the only direct route to safety. Bar staff and visitors were still trying to understand what was happening when the fire took hold, and confusion quickly turned to fear. The three men who started the blaze did not attempt to help. Instead, they fled as soon as the flames erupted. Behind them, the fire they started moved with incredible force, setting off a chain of events that none of the hundreds of people inside the wagon wheel could have anticipated. The quiet threat building on the staircase was now a full emergency, and the people inside the bar were about to face a situation that would unfold faster than anyone could react. Inside the wagon wheel, the fire's first signs were subtle. A few patrons near the stairwell noticed an unfamiliar smell drifting into the room, but most people continued talking, dancing, or listening to the band on stage. The musicians were among the first to realize that something was seriously wrong when they saw smoke rising through the doorway that led to the main staircase. They stopped playing mid-song, and within seconds, a murmur of confusion spread through the crowded room. That confusion turned into fear when the smoke thickened and began drifting across the ceiling. People nearest the exit moved quickly toward the staircase, only to be met with blistering heat and fast-moving flames. With the only regular way out blocked almost instantly, panic rippled through the crowd. Many patrons had never paid attention to the layout of the bar, and in the growing smoke, it became nearly impossible to orient themselves. The wagon wheel's design made escaping even harder. The bar was located on the second floor of an older building, and its emergency exits were inadequate for the number of people inside. A significant problem was that the back exit had been obstructed by stacked beer cases. It was choice that had nothing to do with safety, and everything to do with preventing unpaid entry. When terrified patrons reached that doorway and found it blocked, precious time was lost as they tried unsuccessfully to force it open. As the smoke grew denser, visibility dropped to almost nothing. People could no longer see where they were stepping, and the intense heat made it difficult to breathe. Those who knew about the small window in the women's restroom rushed toward it, hoping it offered another way out. That window led to a long drop onto a parked car, but for many, it was the only option. One by one, men and women squeezed through the narrow opening and leapt to the ground below, some injuring themselves in the fall, but surviving because they acted quickly. Another potential escape was the kitchen's folding fire escape, a metal structure that could be reached by weaving through crowded hallways. Dozens of people attempted to use it at once, and the strain proved too much. Part of the railing failed under the weight, sending several individuals tumbling to the pavement. Others held on or continued down as carefully as they could, but the constant wave of frightened patrons made the descent chaotic and dangerous. Outside, people who managed to escape were shouting for help, urging firefighters and police officers toward the building as the flames continued to spread. Emergency crews arrived rapidly, but by the time they reached the scene, the upper floor was already engulfed in smoke. Firefighters attempted multiple entry points, battling the blaze while trying to reach trapped victims, but the conditions inside were overwhelming. Many survivors later said that everything happened far more quickly than anyone could process, as if the entire room had changed from a lively bar to a deadly trap in only a few minutes. In the aftermath of those first critical moments, it became clear that the layout of the building and the inadequate emergency access had created a situation where escape became nearly impossible for most of the people inside. The fire's speed and the blocked exits left many trapped with nowhere to go, setting the stage for one of the most devastating losses of life the city had ever experienced. When firefighters gained control of the blaze and were finally able to enter the charred structure, the scale of the tragedy became unmistakable. The devastation inside made it immediately clear that the fire had not been accidental. With that realization, investigators began working through the night, gathering witness statements and examining the building for any signs of deliberate ignition. Early accounts from patrons and staff pointed towards suspicious activity near the main staircase shortly before the flames erupted, giving investigators their first crucial lead. Police quickly learned that several individuals had been denied entry to the upstairs bar earlier that evening due to intoxication. Witnesses recalled heated arguments at the door and noticed a vehicle leaving the area shortly before the fire began. This information helped detectives narrow their focus to a small group of suspects. One of the responding officers also obtained a partial license plate number from bystanders who had seen the same vehicle near the entrance shortly before the fire erupted, a detail that significantly helped guide the investigation forward. As police traced the vehicle, they identified 3 young men who had been involved in the altercation: Gilles Eccles, James O'Brien, and Jean-Marc Boutin. Their backgrounds and movements matched what witnesses described, and the timeline placed them near the site of the fire at the exact moment it began. Detectives worked quickly, knowing that the suspects might try to leave the city once they realized the extent of the tragedy. Officers visited homes, interviewed associates, and coordinated with nearby jurisdictions to create a clearer picture of where the men might be headed. The first major break came when officers located one of the suspects in Montreal only a few hours after the fire. This early arrest confirmed the direction of the investigation and provided authorities with enough evidence to pursue the remaining 2 men. Meanwhile, reports surfaced that the other suspects had fled Quebec entirely, prompting police across Canada to be notified. The seriousness of the crime and the large number of victims meant that officers nationwide were briefed on the case and instructed to watch for any signs of the fugitives. For nearly 2 weeks, the search expanded across multiple provinces. Detectives pieced together information from transportation hubs, witness sightings, and travel records, slowly tracking the suspects' movements westward. Their efforts eventually led to British Columbia, where officers located the remaining 2 men. Both were arrested without incident, ending the cross-country manhunt and ensuring that all individuals connected to the crime would face justice. With the suspects in custody, attention shifted to preparing the legal case. Police compiled statements, examined physical evidence, and consulted fire experts to confirm the cause and rapid spread of the blaze. Investigators also reviewed the building's design and the condition of its exits, documenting safety failures that contributed to the high number of casualties. These findings provided a fuller understanding of how a single act of reckless anger had combined with inadequate safety measures to produce such a catastrophic outcome. The arrests marked a turning point in the public's response. While nothing could undo the losses suffered that night, the community found a measure of relief in knowing that those responsible had been identified and would face the courts. Families of the victims, who had waited anxiously for answers, finally saw the first steps toward accountability. With the investigation concluded and the suspects apprehended, the next chapter would take place in the courtroom, where the legal consequences of the tragedy would be determined. The trials that followed the arrests brought the full weight of public scrutiny onto the 3 men responsible for the fire. During the legal proceedings, each suspect acknowledged his role in the events of that night, and testimony revealed the sequence of decisions that led to the deadly blaze. Under a provision of the criminal code that allowed for conviction without proving intent to kill, James O'Brien and Jean-Marc Boutin pleaded guilty to murder and received mandatory life sentences. Gilles Eccles, who whose involvement differed in degree from the others, pleaded guilty to manslaughter and also received a life sentence. For many listening in the courtroom, the admissions provided clarity, but they could not lessen the grief felt by families who had lost loved ones. In the years that followed, the issue of parole became a painful topic for the families. All three men were eventually granted release within roughly 1 decade of their convictions, a reality that left many feeling that the punishment did not reflect the gravity of the tragedy. Some relatives expressed frustration that the consequences imposed by the justice system did not align with the scale of the loss endured by 37 victims. Continued parole violations by James O'Brien, particularly related to alcohol, deepened the public's concern about the adequacy of supervision and accountability after release. Alongside the criminal cases, victims' relatives pursued civil action against the building owner, the bar operators, and local fire authorities. They argued that inadequate safety standards and serious structural issues had contributed to the death toll. A blocked emergency exit, insufficient escape routes, and poor safety oversight were central points in the civil claims. Despite the compelling arguments, the lawsuit was unsuccessful. Many families received only minimal settlements, amounts that felt deeply disproportionate to the lives lost and to the trauma that endured long after the fire. These outcomes sparked ongoing conversations about civil liability and the need for stronger protections for patrons in public spaces. Although the civil case did not bring the resolution families sought, the tragedy ultimately reshaped fire safety practices across Canada. In the years following the fire, governments strengthened building codes, mandated clearer emergency exits, enforced capacity limits, and improved inspection requirements. These nationwide changes were created to prevent the kind of overwhelming structural failure that had trapped so many people inside the wagon wheel bar. The reforms became one of the most significant legacies of the tragedy, offering greater protection for future generations and ensuring that lessons from the disaster would not be forgotten. The site of the former Bluebird Cafe remained empty for many years after the fire, serving as a quiet reminder of the lives lost. Eventually, the original building was demolished, and for decades, the lot remained a parking area in downtown Montreal. A condominium building later replaced it, but the memory of the tragedy continued to hold a place in the city's collective consciousness. In the year 2012, on the 40th anniversary of the fire, a memorial plaque was installed in nearby Phillips Square. The plaque lists the names of the 37 victims and stands as a permanent reminder of a night that changed countless families forever. Today, the Bluebird Cafe fire is remembered not only as a devastating crime, but also as a pivotal moment in Quebec's history. It underscores how a reckless decision and unsafe conditions can intersect with catastrophic consequences. The victims were young adults, friends, workers, and family members who had gathered to enjoy the start of a long weekend. Their stories continue to be honored by those who remember them and by the safety standards that protect people across the country. Though decades have passed, the legacy of the tragedy endures, ensuring that the lessons learned from that night remain part of the city's ongoing commitment to public safety. On New Year's Eve of 1990, the city of St. John in Newfoundland was alive with excitement. Fireworks lit the cold sky, and laughter echoed through quiet neighborhoods as people gathered to welcome a new year. But while the city celebrated, a tragedy was unfolding behind closed doors that would soon shock the entire province. Inside a small home on Harborview Avenue lived Catherine Carroll, a 50-year-old woman, known by her neighbors as kind, devout, and deeply involved in her church community. She worked hard, lived modestly, and was loved by those around her. Nothing about her life suggested she would ever become the victim of one of Newfoundland's most infamous crimes. When Catherine failed to attend morning mass on January 2nd, 1991, people began to worry. She was known for her routine and reliability. Her son, 19-year-old Greg Parsons, tried calling her several times that day but got no answer. As the hours passed, he felt an uneasy sense of dread. That evening, Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, Greg went to her home to check on her. The door was locked and no lights were on. He called out her name several times, but there was no response. Growing desperate, he found a small basement window that had been left slightly ajar and climbed inside. What Greg discovered inside his mother's home would change his life forever. The house was eerily silent, with signs that something was terribly wrong. He found his mother in the bathroom, lifeless. In shock, Greg immediately called emergency services, his voice breaking as he told the operator that his mother was dead. Police quickly arrived at the scene, and within hours, the quiet neighborhood of St. John's had become a full-scale crime scene. Word spread fast, and by morning, the story was already dominating local headlines. The murder of Carroll stunned the entire community. Crimes of that nature were rare in Newfoundland. Many could not comprehend who would harm such a gentle woman. As investigators combed through the small home, they quickly realized that this was not a random act of violence. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. Whoever had done this seemed to know Catherine. But as the hours turned into days, and the pressure to solve the case grew, detectives made a crucial mistake, one that would soon destroy an innocent man's life. Instead of following the evidence wherever it led, investigators began to focus their attention on Greg Parsons, the very person who had discovered his mother's body. What began as a night of horror for a grieving son was about to become a nightmare that would last for years. The tragedy of Carroll's murder was about to grow even darker as the pursuit of justice veered off course in one of the most shocking wrongful convictions in Newfoundland's history. In the days that followed Carroll's murder, investigators with the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary faced intense public pressure to find her killer. The brutal nature of the crime had shaken the community, and people demanded answers. But instead of keeping an open mind, detectives quickly developed a theory that would dominate the entire investigation. They believed that the person responsible had to be someone close to Catherine, someone who knew her daily routine and could enter her home without struggle. Within only a few days, their attention turned squarely to her 19-year-old son, Greg Parsons. At first, Greg cooperated fully with the police. He gave statements, allowed searches, and answered every question they asked. He was heartbroken and confused, struggling to understand why his mother had been killed. But as the interviews continued, Greg began to notice a shift in the tone of the questions. Officers were no longer speaking to him as a grieving son. They were speaking to him as a suspect. Detectives pointed to the lack of forced entry, suggesting that Greg must have used his own key to get inside. They also focused heavily on rumors from neighbors, claiming that Greg and his mother often argued. What started as speculation quickly became the foundation of a case. The police had no physical evidence linking Greg to the crime. There were no fingerprints, no blood, and no DNA that matched him. But investigators pressed forward, relying instead on gossip and emotion. They interviewed dozens of people from Catherine's social circle, collecting over 50 statements that contained hearsay and secondhand claims about Greg's behavior. These statements, though unreliable, painted a picture of a strained relationship between mother and son. Even a private letter Greg had written months earlier, venting teenage frustration, was twisted into what police called a motive for murder. In January of 1991, just 8 days after he found his mother's body, Greg Parsons was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The news spread quickly across Newfoundland. For many, it seemed impossible to believe that a son could commit such an act against his own mother. For others, the police narrative sounded convincing enough to accept. Greg's arrest divided the community and devastated his small circle of friends. Among them was one man whose testimony would later seal Greg's fate, his childhood friend, Randy Druken. Druken told police that Greg had privately confessed to the crime, though there were no witnesses and no physical evidence to support the claim. This testimony became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. When Greg's trial began in 1994, the Crown relied heavily on that alleged confession, along with the mountain of hearsay that the court permitted as evidence. Despite the lack of forensic proof, the jury found Greg Parsons guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. As the verdict was read aloud in court, Greg broke down, sobbing as his family and supporters cried out in disbelief. The system he had trusted had turned against him. His mother's real killer was still out there, and he was behind bars for a crime he did not commit. What followed was a years-long legal battle that would eventually expose one of Newfoundland's most shocking miscarriages of justice. By the time Greg Parsons began serving his life sentence in the mid-1990s, questions about the fairness of his conviction were already growing. Reporters, lawyers, and even members of the public started to wonder how a case with no physical evidence and so much hearsay could have led to a guilty verdict. Within the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary itself, a few officers quietly admitted that the investigation might have been rushed. What had once seemed like an open and shut case was beginning to unravel under closer scrutiny. Greg's legal team filed an appeal, arguing that his trial had been deeply flawed. They pointed out that the court had allowed over 50 hearsay statements, many of them nothing more than neighborhood gossip. They also noted that police had ignored or mishandled key pieces of physical evidence, including a hair and traces of blood found at the crime scene. None of it had been properly analyzed with modern forensic methods. When the Newfoundland Court of Appeal reviewed the case in 1996, the judges agreed. They overturned Greg's conviction and ordered a new trial, ruling that the original proceedings had been unfair. This decision gave Greg his first real glimmer of hope since his arrest. He was released on bail while awaiting the possibility of a new trial, but his name was still stained by the weight of the accusation. He could not work easily, and some people in St. John's still whispered that he had gotten away with murder. His life was in limbo, and his mother's true killer remained free. Yet behind the scenes, science was about to do what the justice system had failed to do, reveal the truth. During the preparation for the new trial, the Crown agreed to re-examine some of the original exhibits from Catherine Carroll's home using DNA testing. By that time, a new technique known as polymerase chain reaction, or PCR testing, had become available in Canada. This method could extract and analyze genetic material from even the smallest samples, something that was not possible when Catherine was killed in 1991. The samples were sent to a forensic laboratory for analysis, and when the results came back, they shocked everyone involved. The DNA evidence found at the scene, including the blood and hair that had never been properly tested before, did not belong to Greg Parsons. The genetic profile matched an unknown male. It was the first clear, scientific proof that Greg could not have committed the crime. After nearly 7 years of living under suspicion, the truth was finally beginning to surface. In February of 1998, prosecutors announced they would not proceed with another trial. Greg was officially acquitted later that year after the Crown presented no evidence against him. The government of Newfoundland and Labrador publicly apologized, acknowledging that Greg Parsons had no involvement in the murder of Catherine Carroll. He later received financial compensation for the years of wrongful imprisonment and public humiliation he had endured. But the exoneration brought with it a haunting question that no one could yet answer. If Greg Parsons was innocent, then who had brutally murdered Catherine Carroll on that cold winter night? The police were forced to reopen the case from the beginning, with one crucial piece of information they had never had before: the real killer's DNA. By the time Greg Parsons began serving his life sentence in the mid-1990s, questions about the fairness of his conviction were already growing. Reporters, lawyers, and even members of the public started to wonder how a case with no physical evidence and so much hearsay could have led to a guilty verdict. Within the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary itself, a few officers quietly admitted that the investigation might have been rushed. What had once seemed like an open and shut case was beginning to unravel under closer scrutiny. Greg's legal team filed an appeal, arguing that his trial had been deeply flawed. They pointed out that the court had allowed over 50 hearsay statements, many of them nothing more than neighborhood gossip. They also noted that police had ignored or mishandled key pieces of physical evidence, including a hair and traces of blood found at the crime scene. None of it had been properly analyzed with modern forensic methods. When the Newfoundland Court of Appeal reviewed the case in 1996, the judges agreed. They overturned Greg's conviction and ordered a new trial, ruling that the original proceedings had been unfair. This decision gave Greg his first real glimmer of hope since his arrest. He was released on bail while awaiting the possibility of a new trial, but his name was still stained by the weight of the accusation. He could not work easily, and some people in St. John's still whispered that he had gotten away with murder. His life was in limbo, and his mother's true killer remained free. Yet behind the scenes, science was about to do what the justice system had failed to do: reveal the truth. During the preparation for the new trial, the Crown agreed to re-examine some of the original exhibits from Catherine Carroll's home using DNA testing. By that time, a new technique known as polymerase chain reaction, or PCR testing, had become available in Canada. This method could extract and analyze genetic material from even the smallest samples, something that was not possible when Catherine was killed in 1991. The samples were sent to a forensic laboratory for analysis, and when the results came back, they shocked everyone involved. The DNA evidence found at the scene, including the blood and hair that had never been properly tested before, did not belong to Greg Parsons. The genetic profile matched an unknown male. It was the first clear scientific proof that Greg could not have committed the crime. After nearly 7 years of living under suspicion, the truth was finally beginning to surface. In February of 1998, prosecutors announced they would not proceed with another trial. Greg was officially acquitted later that year after the Crown presented no evidence against him. The government of Newfoundland and Labrador publicly apologized, acknowledging that Greg Parsons had no involvement in the murder of Catherine Carroll. He later received financial compensation for the years of wrongful imprisonment and public humiliation he had endured. But the exoneration brought with it a haunting question that no one could yet answer. If Greg Parsons was innocent, then who had brutally murdered Catherine Carroll on that cold winter night? The police were forced to reopen the case from the beginning, with one crucial piece of information they had never had before: the real killer's DNA. After hours of tense deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom in mid-1982. The air inside the St. John's courthouse was thick with anticipation as the foreman stood and delivered the verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Brian Doyle showed little emotion as the words were read aloud, while family members of Catherine Carroll quietly wept in the gallery. The judge sentenced Doyle to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years, the maximum penalty available in Canada at the time. For the community of St. John S., the verdict brought a sense of closure, but not relief. Catherine Carroll had been a well-known and deeply loved figure in her neighborhood, remembered for her kindness and generosity. Her death had not only shaken the small city, but also exposed flaws in how crimes against women were investigated in Newfoundland during that period. The tragedy led to renewed discussions about improving forensic practices and ensuring that violent offenders were more closely monitored after release. In the years that followed, the Catherine Carroll case became one of Newfoundland's most studied crimes. It was frequently referenced in legal circles and true crime discussions as a turning point in how rural provinces approached complex murder investigations. Law enforcement agencies began incorporating more advanced evidence preservation methods and collaborated more closely with National Forensic Services to prevent future investigative setbacks. Brian Doyle served his sentence at a federal penitentiary, where he maintained his innocence for years. Appeals were filed, but ultimately denied. Investigators and prosecutors consistently stood by the integrity of their case, noting that every piece of available evidence had been scrutinized and verified. To many, Doyle's conviction represented justice for a woman whose life had been taken without reason, though some in the public continued to question whether all the answers had truly been found. Catherine Carroll's story remains a haunting reminder of how quickly violence can shatter peace in even the quietest corners of the world. Her name still resonates across Newfoundland, especially among those who remember the fear and heartbreak that followed her death. Local memorials have quietly honored her over the years, keeping her memory alive and serving as a warning about the darkness that sometimes hides behind ordinary lives. Decades later, the case continues to be retold in documentaries, books, and local discussions, not because of its mystery, but because of its enduring emotional weight. The murder of Catherine Carroll changed Newfoundland forever, inspiring reforms, reflection, and a renewed dedication to justice in her name. Though time has passed, the echoes of that tragedy still linger, reminding all who hear her story that even one act of violence can leave scars that last for generations. The Yukon Territory in the late 1800s was a land of extremes. Winter blanketed the region for months, with temperatures often plunging far below freezing, and daylight lasting only a few short hours. Small settlements were scattered along the Yukon River, connected by frozen trails and river crossings. In this harsh environment, survival was a daily challenge, and news of violent crime was rare, making any murder a shocking event. On Christmas Day, 1889, tragedy struck the small community of Mayo. Frederick Clayson, a 28-year-old prospector and gold buyer, and Lynn Relf, a young bartender visiting from another settlement, were traveling together along a frequently used trail. Both men were well liked in the region, known for their hard-working nature and friendly demeanor. That morning, they had set out from a roadhouse near the Yukon River, planning to reach a neighboring settlement before the river crossing closed due to ice conditions. Unbeknownst to them, danger was waiting. George O'Brien, a man with a known criminal past, had been roaming the area. Locals recalled him as someone who had arrived in the Yukon only a few years earlier, after serving time abroad for robbery and violent theft. He was considered untrustworthy and had a reputation for luring travelers into secluded areas. O'Brien's knowledge of the remote trails gave him an advantage, allowing him to plan attacks in locations far from immediate help. That Christmas morning, Clayson and Ralph were ambushed along a narrow trail, hidden from the main route. The setting was eerily quiet, with only the whisper of wind across the snow and the distant cry of a lone raven. No one witnessed the attack directly, and the men's absence would not immediately raise alarm because travelers in the area were accustomed to delays caused by weather and terrain. It would take several hours before anyone realized something had gone terribly wrong. By late afternoon, concerned friends and fellow travelers began searching for the missing men. Word reached local authorities and the Northwest Mounted Police, responsible for law enforcement across the vast Yukon, mobilized to investigate. The harsh winter conditions slowed their search, forcing officers to track the men's movements through frozen trails, sled tracks, and signs left in the snow. Even small details, such as broken branches or disturbed snow, became critical clues in understanding what had happened that day. The isolation of the Yukon made the investigation especially challenging. There were no telegraphs reaching the trail where the men disappeared, and the nearest settlements were hours away by dog sled or on foot. Despite these obstacles, officers from the Northwest Mounted Police began coordinating with the local guides to follow the faint signs left behind. They hoped to locate the victims or any evidence that could lead to the perpetrator. The search for Frederick Clayson and Lynn Relf intensified as the afternoon of Christmas Day, 1889, wore on. Local residents, concerned by the men's failure to arrive at their destinations, began alerting the Northwest Mounted Police in Mayo and Dawson City. Mounted officers and guides familiar with the river trails were dispatched to follow the faint signs left in the snow. The winter light was already fading, casting long shadows across the frozen landscape and adding a layer of tension to the search. By evening, the search parties reached a secluded stretch along the Yukon River, where broken branches and scattered footprints indicated a struggle had taken place. Among the trees, they discovered remnants of a campfire that had been hastily extinguished, and nearby snow was disturbed in ways that suggested the men had been confronted. Officers noted that some items, including small personal belongings, were missing, suggesting robbery had played a role. Witnesses later recalled seeing a man with a large dog near the area in the days prior, though no one could identify him clearly at the time. The following morning, Christmas Day, the Northwest Mounted Police found clear evidence of the crime. Clayson and Ralph's bodies were located partially concealed under snow near a narrow, brush-lined trail, confirming the worst fears of their families and friends. Officers worked carefully to document the scene, noting footprints, drag marks, and signs of a struggle that had taken place hours before. The frozen ground preserved these clues, allowing investigators to reconstruct parts of the attack even in the harsh cold. Authorities immediately began collecting evidence from the surrounding area. They found bullets and fragments of clothing near the trail, as well as sled tracks that did not match the men's own equipment. Officers also discovered a trail leading into the thicker forest, suggesting the perpetrators had fled on foot or used a sled to carry items away. These early clues would later become key pieces in understanding the crime and tracing the movements of the murderer. News of the murders spread quickly through the small Yukon settlements. Residents were shocked, and fear began to ripple through the isolated communities. Christmas, normally a time of celebration, became a day of mourning and anxiety. Families worried about their own safety, knowing that the killer was still at large, in a region where help could be hours away. Investigators noted that George O'Brien had a reputation for preying on travelers and had been seen in the general area around the time of the murders. They began to compile witness statements from locals who had traveled the trails in the days leading up to Christmas, seeking anyone who could place him near the crime scene. In such a small community, even minor details could provide the breakthrough needed to identify the culprit. The Northwest Mounted Police also coordinated with guides and prospectors to retrace the trail and identify every potential hiding place in the dense brush and riverbanks. Their goal was to piece together the route taken by the murderer after the attack and recover stolen items that could tie him to the crime. This careful and methodical approach was essential in a landscape where one misstep could erase critical evidence forever. By the end of Christmas Day, 1889, the scope of the crime and the challenges ahead were clear. Clayson and Ralph were dead, the suspect remained at large, and the investigation was only beginning. The brutal murders highlighted the dangers of traveling in the Yukon during the gold rush and set the stage for one of the most complex manhunts in northern Canadian history. With Frederick Clayson and Lynn Ralph confirmed dead, the Northwest Mounted Police launched one of the most intensive manhunts in Yukon history. The vast wilderness surrounding the Yukon River presented immense challenges, with deep snow, frozen trails, and dense forests making pursuit difficult. Officers relied on local guides, prospectors, and even miners who knew the terrain well, creating search parties that fanned out along multiple potential escape routes. The freezing temperatures and short daylight hours added urgency to the operation, as any delay could allow the murderer to disappear completely. Investigators quickly focused on George O'Brien, a man with a violent history and prior convictions in England for robbery. Locals recalled seeing him in the region in the days leading up to Christmas, and his presence near the crime scene made him a prime suspect. O'Brien had reportedly been traveling with Thomas Graves, another man with a dubious reputation, though Graves's identity and movements were far less documented. The police knew that tracking two individuals through the Yukon winter would require careful coordination and keen observation. Search teams followed faint tracks in the snow that suggested a struggle had occurred, noting broken branches and drag marks near the riverbank. Officers found evidence that personal items had been removed from the victims, which reinforced the theory of robbery as a motive. Meanwhile, sled tracks led investigators toward denser forest areas, suggesting that the perpetrators had attempted to transport stolen items away from the trail. Witness statements also mentioned a large yellow dog seen in the company of O'Brien, a detail that would later help link him to the murders. Constable Alexander Pennycuick and Private Detective Philip McGuire, hired by the Clayson family, coordinated efforts to retrace the path of the victims and potential escape routes for the suspects. They questioned every prospector and traveler in nearby settlements, seeking any unusual sightings or behavior. Even minor observations, such as a campfire left extinguished or footprints leading into the woods, became critical clues in piecing together the movements of O'Brien and his accomplice. The search was painstaking, and every day brought new hardships from both the environment and the elusive nature of the suspects. The Yukon River itself became a focus of the investigation. Officers believed the perpetrators might have used the river to obscure evidence or move stolen items. In some cases, floating debris and partially submerged sleds provided small, yet valuable pieces of evidence. These findings required careful cataloging, as the frozen conditions could both preserve and destroy critical traces of the crime. The NWMP knew that meticulous documentation was essential in an era without modern forensic technology. As the search progressed into late December, morale among local residents and search parties was mixed. There was a hope that the suspects would be found quickly, but the harsh winter conditions and vast distances made certainty impossible. Families of the victims, particularly Clayson's and Ralph's relatives, stayed in contact with investigators, offering information and describing any unusual sightings in the days before the murders. Their cooperation proved vital in reconstructing the timeline leading to Christmas Day, 1889. By the end of the month, evidence was slowly mounting against George O'Brien. Items stolen from the victims were traced to Dawson City, and several witnesses reported seeing O'Brien traveling alone with a large yellow dog in the vicinity. Although Thomas Graves remained unaccounted for, these leads gave investigators hope that the manhunt was closing in on the primary suspect. The Northwest Mounted Police continued to expand patrols along the trails, determined to capture him before he could vanish further into the wilderness. The manhunt for O'Brien would ultimately test the limits of law enforcement in the remote Yukon frontier. Despite freezing temperatures, dangerous terrain, and limited resources, officers were relentless in tracking the suspect. Every clue, no matter how small, was followed with painstaking care, demonstrating the determination of the NWMP to bring justice to the families of Clayson and Ralph. This phase of the investigation set the stage for the capture and eventual trial of George O'Brien, a pursuit that would become legendary in Canadian true crime history. As January of 1890 emerged in the Yukon, the Northwest Mounted Police intensified their search for George O'Brien. Officers established observation posts along key trails used by prospectors and traders, hoping to catch any sign of movement from the suspect. Snow and ice covered the terrain, forcing patrols to move cautiously and follow tracks with great attention to detail. Witnesses reported seeing O'Brien in the Dawson City area, often with the distinctive yellow dog that had been noted near the crime scene, strengthening investigators' confidence that they were following the right lead. During this period, the NWMP also focused on tracing stolen property. Several items belonging to Clayson and Ralph were located in cabins and supply depots around Dawson City. These discoveries confirmed the theory that the murders had been motivated, at least in part, by robbery. Officers worked alongside local residents, who were asked to remain vigilant for anyone traveling with unusual equipment or with stolen goods. These community reports, combined with patrol observations, began narrowing down the areas where O'Brien could be hiding. Meanwhile, Private Detective Philip McGuire continued to gather witness statements. Miners and settlers recalled seeing O'Brien at odd hours, often behaving nervously or attempting to avoid interaction. Small inconsistencies in his movements, such as the appearance of sled tracks that did not match, any registered owners or dogs seen out of place, were recorded meticulously. Each piece of information, no matter how minor, contributed to a growing profile of the suspect's habits and possible hideouts. By mid-February, a breakthrough came when O'Brien was recognized near a remote trading post. Constable Penny Kewick and other officers coordinated a careful approach, intending to prevent any chance of escape. O'Brien was arrested without incident, taken into custody, and brought to Dawson City for questioning. His capture marked the turning point in the investigation, transforming it from a dangerous wilderness manhunt into a controlled criminal case. Once in custody, O'Brien faced intense questioning regarding his movements on Christmas Day, 1889, and the events leading up to the murders of Clayson and Ralph. Despite the harsh northern conditions and limited forensic tools, officers collected detailed accounts from him and cross-referenced them with witness testimonies. His possession of items linked to the victims, combined with sightings of the stolen yellow dog, created a strong body of circumstantial evidence. The investigation also revealed O'Brien's broader criminal planning. Officers learned that he had scouted the trail along the Yukon River in advance and had prepared for the possibility of encountering travelers. This methodical preparation demonstrated a level of premeditation that solidified the seriousness of the charges against him. Even without modern technology, investigators were able to piece together a timeline that accounted for O'Brien's movements before and after the murders. Community reaction in Dawson City and surrounding settlements was a mix of relief and apprehension. People felt safer knowing the suspected killer was in custody, yet the memory of the Christmas Day murders remained fresh. Residents of Minto and nearby areas continued to follow the case closely, providing additional leads and insights when possible. The NWOMP relied heavily on this cooperation, recognizing that local knowledge was essential in building a case that could stand up in court. As March of 1890 progressed, preparations for O'Brien's trial began. Evidence was organized, witness statements compiled, and officers prepared to testify on the challenging conditions of the manhunt. The meticulous record-keeping, combined with the courage and persistence of the NWMP and private investigators, ensured that the case would be thoroughly documented. With O'Brien in custody, the focus shifted from pursuing a fugitive to presenting a compelling case for justice for Frederick Clayson and Lynn Ralph. With George O'Brien securely in custody, preparations for his trial moved forward in Dawson City during the spring of 1890. The courtroom was small and crowded, filled with settlers, miners, and law enforcement officers, all eager to see justice served for Frederick Clayson and Lynn Ralph. The prosecution presented a detailed timeline of the murders, using witness statements, recovered stolen property, and sightings of O'Brien and the distinctive yellow dog to build a clear picture of his actions. Despite the lack of modern forensic tools, the evidence was compelling, highlighting the premeditated nature of the crimes and O'Brien's attempt to cover his tracks in the harsh Yukon wilderness. Over several days, multiple witnesses testified. Miners, traders, and residents described seeing O'Brien near the crime scene and handling items belonging to the victims. Constable Alexander Penny Kewick and Private Detective Philip McGuire provided detailed accounts of the manhunt, showing how careful observation, patience, and local knowledge led to O'Brien's capture. The jury heard about the careful planning, the ambush along the river trail, and the meticulous efforts by investigators to piece together the events of Christmas Day, 1889. Each testimony reinforced the view that O'Brien had acted deliberately, leaving no doubt in the minds of those present. After deliberating, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on June 19, 1890. The sentence was death by hanging, which was carried out at Dawson City later that summer. O'Brien's accomplice, Thomas Graves, was never located, disappearing into the Yukon wilderness and leaving behind a trail of speculation about his fate. Despite the missing accomplice, the conviction of O'Brien provided some measure of closure for the families of Clayson and Ralph, and for the wider community who had been shaken by the murders. The case became a landmark in Yukon criminal history, It demonstrated the effectiveness of the Northwest Mounted Police in tracking criminals across hundreds of kilometers of frozen, rugged terrain. The investigation also highlighted the importance of witness testimony, local knowledge, and careful observation in solving crimes in remote areas, long before modern forensic science existed. The successful resolution reinforced public confidence in the NWMP and set a precedent for how serious crimes would be investigated in the territory. For the families of the victims, justice brought some relief, but not full comfort. The brutal murders on Christmas Day left a permanent mark on the memory of those who knew Clayson and Ralph. Communities across the Yukon continued to tell the story as a cautionary tale of the dangers of the wilderness and the need for vigilance, even in a place as remote as Minto. The murders also left a lasting imprint on the law enforcement culture in the region. The dedication and methodical work of officers like Penny Kewick inspired future generations of Mounties, emphasizing the principle that no matter how isolated a crime scene, determined police work could prevail. The phrase, "they always get their man," long associated with the Mounties, found one of its most literal expressions in this case. Even more than a century later, the Christmas Day murders of 1889 remain a notable story in Canadian true crime history. It serves as a reminder of both the perils faced by travelers in the Yukon during the gold rush and the unwavering commitment of law enforcement to seek justice, no matter the obstacles. The case continues to fascinate historians, true crime enthusiasts, and those interested in the extraordinary challenges of policing Canada's northern frontier. In the end, the homicides of Frederick Clayson and Lynn Ralph are remembered not only for their tragedy, but also for the perseverance and courage shown by investigators who refused to let a killer vanish into the wilderness. Their story is a testament to the resilience of a small frontier community and the enduring pursuit of justice in even the most remote corners of the world. Roch Theriault was born in rural Quebec in 1947, growing up in a small French-Canadian community where religion shaped almost every part of daily life. His family had very limited money, and his childhood was marked by strict routines and few opportunities. Even as a boy, Theriault showed a strange mix of charm and defiance. Teachers described him as intelligent but restless, someone who enjoyed attention yet never followed rules for long. By his teenage years, he had left school entirely, choosing instead to drift through odd jobs while searching for a sense of importance he never found at home. In his early adulthood, Theriault married young and had 2 sons, but domestic life did not anchor him. During this period, he suffered painful stomach ulcers that required surgery. The discomfort that followed pushed him toward alternative healing ideas, and he began reading heavily about natural medicine, home remedies, and faith-based cures. This formed the start of a lifelong obsession with controlling the health and bodies of the people around him. Although he had no medical training, he started speaking confidently as if he had special insight, and those who met him often noted how confidently he delivered even questionable claims. During the early 1970s, Theriault drifted into the Seventh-day Adventist Church, attracted by its teachings about clean living and biblical prophecies. He quickly stood out. His intense enthusiasm for Scripture, paired with his talent for speaking, earned him a small circle of admirers within the congregation. But he also began twisting teachings to suit his own ideas about the end times and spiritual purity. Church leaders noticed his growing influence and his increasing resistance to authority, creating tension that would soon grow into open conflict. By the spring of 1978, the Seventh-day Adventist Church formally expelled Theriault for his disruptive behavior and his refusal to follow church doctrine. Instead of stepping back, he used this rejection to claim he had been singled out because he carried a higher truth. This moment marked a turning point. Freed from oversight, he began reshaping himself into a self-declared prophet who insisted that only he understood the meaning of coming world events. His confidence attracted a small group of followers, many of them young adults searching for purpose or structure. By late 1978, Theriault had created his own small communal group in rural Quebec, insisting that modern society was corrupt and spiritually doomed. He encouraged the group to withdraw from their families, jobs, and previous lives, telling them that only isolation would keep them safe from the disaster he predicted was coming. He presented himself as the only guide they could trust, and his followers accepted this, despite having little evidence beyond his bold speeches and dramatic warnings. That winter, he predicted that a world-ending catastrophe would strike in early 1979, and the group spent their days preparing for a disaster that never came. When the predicted date arrived and nothing happened, Theriault did not admit he was wrong. Instead, he claimed that spiritual timelines did not match human calendars, and said that their devotion had postponed the end. This explanation allowed him to maintain complete control, and his followers, already isolated from the outside world, embraced the idea rather than challenge it. By the end of that winter, the group had accepted Theriault not just as a leader, but as a prophetic figure. The stage was set for the creation of a closed, controlled world where questioning was forbidden, and where one man's influence would grow into something far more dangerous. By the early months of 1979, Roch Theriault's small group had accepted him as their spiritual guide, and this loyalty gave him the confidence to reshape their daily lives. He directed his followers to settle on a piece of rural land in Quebec, where they could live apart from outside influence. The group built crude cabins, cooked communally, and spent long days completing physical labor that Theriault claimed would strengthen their faith. He encouraged them to view the outside world as corrupt and unsafe, a message that made them increasingly dependent on him for every decision. In this isolated setting, he positioned himself as both the interpreter of spiritual truth and the ultimate authority on how they should live. As the weeks passed, Theriault began assigning roles within the group, controlling everything from chores to relationships. He insisted that he alone had the right to determine who could speak to who could rest, and who had to work late into the night. Everyday choices, such as what to eat or when to sleep, became matters that required his approval. These strict rules made the group's members feel constantly judged and eager to prove their loyalty. Theriault often reminded them that their isolation was a blessing, because it kept them away from family members who might weaken their faith. Over time, this approach severed most ties between the followers and their relatives. During the early 1980s, Theriault moved the group through several rural locations, each one more remote than the last. These relocations were framed as spiritual directives, but they also kept the commune hidden from authorities and former acquaintances who might question his leadership. At every new site, followers lived in small handmade buildings, relying almost entirely on Theriault's decisions to manage basic survival. He told them that hardship was a form of purification, and that physical struggle was necessary to prepare for future trials. Many followers accepted these explanations, feeling they were part of a chosen community, even when daily life became increasingly difficult. As his influence grew, Theriault began referring to the group as a single spiritual family, and he adopted the name Ant Hill Kids to describe their constant activity and shared purpose. He told them that diligent work was a sign of devotion, and that every task, no matter how small, was part of a divine plan. This idea made long hours of labor feel meaningful, even when supplies were scarce and living conditions were harsh. By positioning himself as the only source of approval, he created an environment where followers feared disappointing him more than they feared discomfort or exhaustion. Over time, Theriault also began controlling the group's finances. Followers contributed their savings, sold handmade goods, and turned over any income they earned from temporary jobs in nearby towns. He explained that money would only corrupt them if handled individually, and that he alone could be trusted to manage it wisely. This financial dependency made it even harder for followers to leave, since they no longer had access to personal funds or the ability to support themselves outside the commune. Many accepted this loss of independence because they believed they were contributing to a sacred mission. By the early 1980s, Theriault's control evolved beyond routines and resources. He began discouraging any signs of doubt or independent thinking, framing questions as evidence of spiritual weakness. Followers who expressed uncertainty were told that they needed to work harder to strengthen their faith, or were instructed to confess perceived shortcomings in front of the group. These public confessions allowed Theriault to reinforce the idea that only he could judge sincerity and purity. Over time, even mild frustrations or concerns were suppressed out of fear of disappointing him or being isolated from the rest of the group. As the commune grew more closed off, outside visitors became rare, and the group's daily activities blended into a strict cycle of chores, teachings, and constant affirmation of Theriault's authority. The longer followers lived in this rigid world, the more distant their old identities felt. By the time the group relocated to their later sites, the psychological foundations of the cult were firmly set. Members had become accustomed to seeking approval for every action, trusting Theriault's explanations without question, and viewing separation from the outside world as a necessary part of spiritual devotion. By the end of this period, Theriault had achieved something he had been building toward since the group's earliest days: total control over the structure of their lives. The commune operated according to his rules and his interpretations, with no oversight from any family member, religious organization, or community authority. In this isolated world, his influence reached its peak, laying the groundwork for even more dangerous behaviors that would soon follow. By the early months of 1984, Roch Theriault moved the group from Quebec to a remote area near Burnt River in Ontario, marking a turning point in the commune's history. The move placed the Anthill kids deeper into isolation, far from towns, extended family, or medical services. Theriault described the relocation as a spiritual necessity, telling followers that a remote setting would protect them from negative outside influences. The settlement consisted of makeshift buildings, and the group relied on improvised systems for food, water, and heat. These conditions created an environment where Theriault's authority was rarely questioned, because members depended on him for basic survival. During the first months in Ontario, Theriault's ideas about health and healing became more extreme. He believed he had a unique understanding of the human body and often lectured followers about natural remedies and spiritual causes of illness. Because he discouraged medical professionals, even minor health issues were handled within the commune. This approach laid the foundation for increasingly dangerous decisions, as he insisted that physical pain represented spiritual imbalance that only he could correct. Followers who became sick or injured were told that faith and obedience were the only paths to recovery. It was during this period that outside authorities first became aware of concerns involving the Anthill kids. A small number of followers had intermittent contact with nearby residents while doing occasional work or errands, and their unusual behavior caught attention. Some appeared underweight or nervous, and vague mentions of strict rules raised concerns. Because the commune lived far from main roads, these observations were limited, but they planted early suspicion among locals. A few people contacted social service agencies, which sparked preliminary check-ins, though these were brief and did not uncover the full situation. In 1984, one of the first official interventions occurred when social workers visited the commune after receiving reports about the welfare of the children. The inspection was short and limited in scope, partly because Theriault had prepared the group to respond calmly to outsiders. The buildings were rustic but appeared functional, and the children did not discuss the harsh conditions they faced. As a result, authorities left without taking further action. This visit marked a missed opportunity because it gave Theriault greater confidence in his ability to avoid scrutiny. From that point onward, he became even more cautious about allowing followers to speak with visitors. As the year progressed, a series of troubling events struck the commune. One incident involved the death of a newborn infant, a tragedy that highlighted the dangers of the group's isolated lifestyle. Without medical professionals or safe conditions for childbirth, complications led to fatal outcomes. Theriault explained the situation in spiritual terms, claiming the event reflected forces beyond human control. His explanation went unchallenged, because followers had been conditioned to accept his interpretation of every misfortune. This loss deepened the group's fear of seeking outside help, since Theriault warned that authorities would only punish them if they revealed internal problems. Another major concern involved the treatment of children within the commune. Several were born into the group, while others were brought by their parents when they joined. Life for these children was shaped entirely by the environment Theriault had created, one where schooling was informal, outside contact was discouraged, and daily routines revolved around physical labor. Their understanding of the world was limited because they had been raised to view Theriault's guidance as unquestionable truth. The lack of proper nutrition, education, and medical care began to show in physical and developmental problems, though these issues remained largely hidden from outsiders. By the end of 1984, followers were experiencing significant stress due to scarcity of resources, strict rules, and growing tension within the group. Theriault interpreted these challenges as tests of faith and reassured followers that hardship proved their spiritual worth. This message kept the group unified despite rising doubts among a few individuals. Those who questioned him privately worried about being separated from the group or losing access to their children, so they stayed silent. These fears strengthened Theriault's control, allowing him to tighten his grip on the commune. Throughout this period, the group's daily struggles went unnoticed by most authorities, allowing the situation to deteriorate further. The combination of harsh living conditions, social isolation, and unwavering loyalty to Theriault set the stage for even more alarming events in the years that followed. What had begun as a small spiritual community had evolved into a closed world where every aspect of life was filtered through the decisions of one man. As the mid-1980s approached, the commune was entering a far more dangerous phase that would eventually draw national attention. By the late 1980s, the violent atmosphere inside Roch Theriault's remote commune had reached a breaking point. Life in the wilderness community had already deteriorated, but everything changed when one member, Gabrielle Lavallee, managed to escape after enduring years of severe physical abuse and mutilation at Theriault's hands. Her escape in the year 1989 finally brought outsiders into direct contact with the truth the followers had been too terrified to reveal. When Gabrielle reached help, she provided a detailed and horrifying account of the assaults, the isolation, and the forced medical procedures that Theriault claimed were spiritual treatments. Police took her testimony seriously, and for the first time, authorities were able to investigate the commune with a clearer picture of what had been happening behind closed doors. As investigators examined her injuries and gathered evidence, they uncovered a pattern of escalating violence that aligned with earlier concerns raised by social workers and community officials years prior. Theriault attempted to maintain control by insisting that the accusations were lies meant to destroy him, but the evidence was overwhelming. When officers finally arrived at the commune site, many members were in fragile physical and psychological condition, still trapped in the belief that Theriault's authority came from a divine source. The rescue required careful intervention, because even after enduring years of cruelty, several followers continued to defend him. Authorities removed the remaining members from the isolated settlement, ensuring their protection while building a formal legal case. By the end of the year, 1989, enough evidence had been collected for multiple charges, marking the first time Theriault's crimes were fully exposed to the public. The shattering of the commune was not simply the end of a secluded religious group. It was the unraveling of years of deception, manipulation, and extreme violence that had gone largely unseen. Part 4 closes with Theriault facing a criminal justice system he could no longer charm, intimidate, or escape, and with survivors finally stepping into the world beyond his control. With the survivors safely removed from the commune, the full scope of Roch Theriault's crimes began to emerge. Police investigations revealed the extent of physical abuse, neglect, and murder that had occurred over more than a decade. Evidence collected from the commune, along with survivor testimonies, provided an overwhelming case against Theriault, leaving the little room for denial or delay. Authorities quickly moved to arrest him in early September 1989, bringing an end to his reign of terror. The legal proceedings that followed were complex, as prosecutors had to document years of abuse, forced confinement, and multiple deaths, including the murder of Solange Bollard. Theriault faced charges of second-degree murder, aggravated assault, and other serious crimes. In 1993, he pleaded guilty to the murder charge and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Additional convictions for assault and other offenses ensured that Theriault would remain behind bars for the rest of his life. Even while incarcerated at Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick, Theriault continued to demonstrate manipulative tendencies. He fathered 4 more children through conjugal visits with the remaining followers, who remained loyal despite his crimes. Authorities closely monitored his interactions, and he was repeatedly denied parole due to the extreme risk he posed to society. On February 26, 2011, Roch Theriault died in prison after being attacked by another inmate. His death marked the final chapter in the life of one of Canada's most notorious cult leaders. While his manipulations and violence caused irreparable harm, the survivors of the Anthill Kids went on to rebuild their lives, some sharing their stories publicly to educate others about the dangers of cults and extreme control. The story of Roch Theriault remains a stark warning about the dangers of charismatic leaders who exploit faith and isolation. It serves as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, mental health support, and community awareness in protecting vulnerable individuals. Though the horrors of the Anthill Kids commune can never be undone, the courage of survivors and the legal consequences for Theriault provide a measure of justice and a critical lesson in Canadian criminal history. On the evening of June 7th, 2017, 24-year-old Cortney Lake was captured on a residential security camera, leaving her home on Wellington Crescent in Mount Pearl. She walked away around 7:52 p.m., wearing a gray hooded parka with a pink liner, a pink and white plaid shirt, black pants, and glasses. Details later confirmed by the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. Just 2 minutes later, at 7:54 p.m., dashcam footage shows her getting into a black GMC pickup truck on Michener Avenue. The truck had a distinctive Browning-style camouflage deer head decal on the rear window, a key detail in the investigation. Prior to that night, Cortney's life was difficult. She was navigating a troubled relationship and had reported serious abuse. Her ex-boyfriend, Philip Smith, had court-ordered conditions to stay away from her and her family. Just hours before her disappearance, he admitted in court that he had picked her up, violating one of those restraining orders. That admission transformed the case. What had begun as a missing person report quickly grew into something much darker. The next day, June 8th, the RNC officially identified Cortney's disappearance as suspicious. Public appeals went out for help. Dashcam footage, surveillance images, and the distinctive truck detail were all shared, in hopes someone would come forward. Family, friends, and community members rallied behind the hashtag #HelpFindCourtney, pushing the story across social media, desperately seeking new leads. The last known images of Cortney walking toward the truck remain frozen in time, haunting, unresolved, and central to a case that still haunts Newfoundland. In the days following Cortney Lake's disappearance, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary began building a detailed picture of her final known movements. Officers conducted door-to-door inquiries throughout Mount Carroll, gathering additional residential footage to track the black pickup truck after it left Michener Avenue. Investigators confirmed that the truck continued toward the area of Ruth Avenue, a detail they later publicly released in hopes of jogging someone's memory. Community members submitted tips, video clips, and possible sightings, giving the RNC crucial starting points as the search widened. Cortney's family organized public search efforts almost immediately. Volunteers combed wooded areas, trails, and ponds across Mount Pearl and St. John's, guided by the possibility that the truck may have traveled to isolated spaces nearby. These searches drew large crowds, all hoping to find any sign of where Cortney could have gone after entering the vehicle. The RNC supported several of these community-led searches by providing guidance and ensuring search locations did not interfere with active investigative work. Police also began examining Cortney's recent history, including her known fears, her relationships, and any potential conflicts that could help establish motive. They contacted individuals she had interacted with in the days leading up to her disappearance, including friends, co-workers, and family members. Officers reviewed her phone records, checked banking activity, and monitored travel documents. Everything indicated that Cortney had not left the area voluntarily, and there was no evidence she had planned to go anywhere that night beside her mother's home. Investigators began looking closely at the truck captured on camera, analyzing its unique features and matching them to possible owners. Tips from the public helped narrow the list, and before long, the RNC identified one individual whose vehicle matched the distinctive appearance shown in the footage. This discovery prompted further interviews, forensic examinations, and searches of locations connected to that person. Police remained cautious, stating only that they had identified individuals of investigative interest, but they emphasized that the case remained open-ended as new information continued to surface. As the end of June approached, the investigation took a significant turn. Evidence gathered in the first few weeks led detectives to conclude that Cortney had not simply gone missing. She had likely been the victim of a violent crime. This shift in focus marked the beginning of an entirely new phase of the investigation, one that would bring the province's attention to a single troubling question. If Cortney had been harmed, where was she now? This change in direction set the stage for the next major development in the case, as police prepared to address the public with their most serious update yet. By late June of 2017, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary had reached a point where the evidence gathered no longer aligned with a typical missing person case. Detectives had reviewed hours of residential footage, confirmed the exact time Cortney was last seen, and traced her path with as much precision as the available video allowed. Despite the extensive efforts of both law enforcement and volunteers, there remained no confirmed sightings of Cortney after she entered the black pickup truck on Michener Avenue. With each passing day, the likelihood that she was simply lost or hiding diminished. On the afternoon of June 30th, the RNC held a carefully prepared press conference. The tone was somber, and the message was unmistakably serious. Investigators announced that Cortney Lake's disappearance was now officially being treated as a homicide. They stated that information collected during the investigation supported the belief that she had been the victim of a violent act. This declaration did not come lightly. Police rarely reclassify a case without strong evidentiary grounds. Although they did not share details of what led them to this conclusion, the shift marked a major turning point for both the investigation and the community. At that same conference, the RNC released two key pieces of information. First, they made public the security footage showing Cortney getting into the black pickup truck on the evening of June 7th. It was a clip the police had held privately until they were certain it was essential for public awareness. The vehicle's distinctive browning camouflage decal, its model, and the exact timestamp were all highlighted as investigators urged anyone who recognized the truck's movements after that point to come forward. Second, police confirmed that more than one person had been identified as a person of interest. They refused to release names, citing the need to protect the integrity of the investigation, but the phrasing caught widespread attention. The possibility of additional individuals connected to the events of that night led to speculation and urgency within the community, especially as investigators had already searched multiple properties linked to one of those individuals. Following the press conference, search operations intensified. The RNC deployed specialized units to remote locations on the outskirts of St. John's and Mount Pearl, focusing on areas with a difficult terrain. Officers used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, and trained dogs to scan ponds, wooded regions, and isolated trails. These searches were guided by tips, by digital data patterns, and by their own investigative analysis. Despite the scale of these efforts, no physical trace of Cortney surfaced. As the investigation moved deeper into the summer, detectives continued to pursue new leads while carefully re-examining earlier ones. They worked to verify timelines, confirm sightings, and clarify information provided by witnesses. Every movement captured on video, every reported tip, and every piece of digital evidence was reviewed in hopes of revealing where Cortney had been taken after the pickup truck turned off Michener Avenue. While the declaration of homicide brought a new level of seriousness to the search, it also left the public and Cortney's family facing an overwhelming mixture of grief, fear, and determination. With no recovery, no confession, and no firm answers, the case had shifted into one of Newfoundland's most deeply troubling investigations, one that now centered on uncovering who was responsible and where Cortney might be. As July of 2017 unfolded, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary intensified its focus on the one individual whose actions, history, and proximity to Cortney placed him at the center of the investigation, Philip Smith. Although the police had not publicly named him during early press conferences, their investigative direction became increasingly clear through the searches they conducted and the court records that emerged. Smith's past involvement with Cortney, combined with the video evidence of him picking her up on the evening she vanished, brought him under mounting scrutiny. In the weeks following Cortney's disappearance, the RNC executed detailed searches at locations connected to Smith. Officers inspected his property, examined outbuildings, and used specialized teams to look for any signs that Cortney had been there. They also seized his black GMC Sierra pickup truck and conducted forensic testing. The distinctive vehicle, recognizable for its browning camouflage decal, was the last confirmed place where Cortney had been seen alive. Although the truck was eventually returned after examination, investigators remained convinced that the time she spent inside it held critical answers. During this period, Smith faced growing legal consequences unrelated to the homicide investigation, but deeply tied to his past behavior toward Cortney. On June 27th, only 20 days after she vanished, he was arrested for breaching a no-contact order. This was not directly related to the search for Cortney, but it placed him in custody while investigators continued to build their case. His prior guilty plea for assaulting Cortney in April of that same year, along with earlier breaches of court-ordered restrictions, painted a clear pattern of escalating and dangerous behavior. As detectives continued their work, Smith appeared in court again on August 9th of 2017. During that hearing, he pleaded guilty to breaching the order that prohibited contact with Cortney. But what drew the most attention was a brief and chilling admission. Smith acknowledged that he had picked Cortney up on the evening she disappeared. He confirmed what police had already believed from the security footage. However, he refused to answer any other questions. He provided no explanation for where they went, what happened afterward, or when he last saw her. His silence deepened the mystery and intensified the sense of urgency around the investigation. Behind the scenes, the RNC was conducting broad and methodical searches in remote and heavily wooded areas. Tips from the public, digital analysis, and additional evidence guided officers to locations across the Avalon Peninsula, including isolated trails and rugged terrain. One area, near Bellevue Beach, roughly an hour outside St. John S., drew particular attention. Detectives were not ready to release their full reasoning, but it was clear they believed the region might hold relevance to Smith's movements in the time after Cortney was last seen. Despite their efforts, investigators found no trace of Cortney. Each unsuccessful search added emotional weight to the case, leaving her loved ones in a devastating limbo. Still, police publicly reaffirmed their belief that people within the community held information that had not yet been shared. They encouraged anyone with knowledge of Smith's movements, especially on the night of June 7th, or the days that followed, to contact investigators. Smith's behavior, combined with his refusal to cooperate, solidified him as the primary focus of the investigation. And as the summer progressed into autumn, an unexpected and tragic shift in the case would change its direction forever. As autumn of 2017 began, the investigation into Cortney Lake's disappearance reached a critical turning point, one that brought no closure, only deeper uncertainty. Philip Smith, the man investigators believed held the most crucial information, had remained silent through every stage of questioning. But on the final day of October, a development occurred that would permanently alter the course of the case. On the evening of October 31st, Smith contacted a family member and stated that he intended to end his life. This call triggered immediate concern and prompted authorities to begin a search for him. Early the next morning, on November 1st of 2017, officers and police dogs were deployed to the Bellevue Beach area, a region tied to Smith's family through a cabin located nearby. After several hours of searching the wooded landscape, an RNC police dog located Smith's body in a forested section of the property. His death was confirmed at the scene. With that discovery, the only person known to have last seen Cortney alive was gone, taking with him the answers that investigators, and especially Cortney's family, had desperately hoped he would eventually provide. The search for Cortney intensified in the days that followed. Officers conducted a detailed examination of the surrounding woods, checking trails, ditches, and dense brush for any possible evidence connected to her disappearance. Despite covering a wide area, investigators found nothing that linked the location to Cortney's case. The discovery of Smith's body offered no new leads, leaving detectives with a suspect who could no longer be questioned, in a case that remained painfully open. 2 weeks later, on November 14th of 2017, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary addressed the public in a formal update. In that announcement, they confirmed what many had suspected. Philip Smith was the sole suspect in the homicide of Cortney Lake. Although police had previously referred to persons of interest, their investigation had ultimately narrowed to one individual. With Smith deceased, the case shifted from seeking a suspect to seeking answers that only he had been in a position to provide. The months that followed brought extensive searches across the Avalon Peninsula. Volunteers, family members, and trained search teams combed rivers, forests, and trails, refusing to give up hope. Cortney's family remained publicly committed to finding her, organizing searches, and speaking about her case whenever possible. Their determination helped keep public attention alive, especially during times when investigative updates grew sparse. What remained clear was that no amount of time or distance could weaken their resolve to bring her home. To this day, Cortney Lake has not been found. Her disappearance remains an active homicide investigation, and the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary continues to urge anyone with information, no matter how minor it may seem, to come forward. Detectives believe that someone within the community may have witnessed something relevant on the night of June 7th or in the days that followed, and that those details could finally help locate her remains. Cortney's case stands as one of Newfoundland's most heartbreaking reminders of how quickly violence can escalate and how devastating unanswered questions can be for a family. Her loved ones have preserved her memory through vigils, community walks, and continued advocacy, always pushing for the truth that was denied to them by the silence of the man at the center of the investigation. They remain hopeful that, with time, someone will step forward and provide the information needed to bring Cortney home. Although years have passed, this case continues to hold a powerful impact across the province. What happened after Cortney stepped into that truck remains unknown, but her family's belief in finding her has never faded, and until answers emerge, her story continues to be told, because every lead, every shared detail, and every moment of awareness brings them one step closer to the closure they have been seeking for far too long. Faro, Yukon, is a remote town of fewer than 500 residents, located along the Pelly River in Canada's northern wilderness. Life here is slow and familiar, with neighbors relying on one another through long winters and short summers. People know each other by name, and community connections run deep. On the morning of October 26th, 2021, the town appeared peaceful, its streets quiet, and the surrounding forests cloaked in autumn colors. Sangduan Honchayapum, often called Sang, was a 42-year-old mother of 2 young daughters. She had moved to Faro from Thailand several years earlier and had built a small business making colorful hair accessories, which brought joy and a sense of creativity to the tight-knit community. Known for her bright personality and determination, she had recently separated from her husband, Ralph Bernard Shaw, and was living independently for the first time in many years. Friends said she was embracing life and enjoying newfound freedom in the town she had grown to love. Patrick McCracken, 73, was another well-known and respected figure in Faro. He had served the town in various roles, including as a counselor and public works supervisor. McCracken had a reputation for kindness and resourcefulness, often helping neighbors with home projects, repairs, and advice. His family described him as someone who could fix almost anything and who cared deeply for his community. Ralph Shaw, 41 at the time, had lived in Faro for many years before separating from Sang in August 2021. After their separation, he relocated to Whitehorse, roughly 360 kilometers southwest, but tensions remained. Shaw's anger and resentment would later become central to the tragic events that were about to unfold. On that quiet October morning, the people of Faro had no indication that their lives were about to change forever, or that one man's actions would send shockwaves through the community. On the morning of October 26th, 2021, Ralph Bernard Shaw was seen at a hotel in Whitehorse, loading a long gun case into his black pickup truck. Surveillance cameras captured him leaving the city, heading north toward Faro, a drive of several hours through remote terrain. Shaw's purpose was clear. He intended to confront his estranged wife, Sangduan Honchayapum, and anyone connected to her new life. By just before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Shaw arrived at Sang's residence in Faro. She was outside with her new partner and his friend, moving furniture in preparation for her settled life. An argument began on the back balcony. Despite Sang repeatedly telling Shaw to leave, he refused to back down. The tension escalated rapidly, drawing the attention of neighbors who would later report hearing shouting and commotion. Shaw then produced an illegally obtained handgun. He shot Sangduan Honchayapum on the balcony, taking her life in front of witnesses. Her new partner was also shot multiple times, but managed to escape, running for safety with the aid of his friend. In the chaos, Shaw fired toward nearby buildings as he pursued his target, demonstrating a willingness to put anyone in the vicinity at risk. Within moments, the small town of Faro went from calm and quiet to a scene of terror, Residents called emergency services, reporting shots fired, while police officers began mobilizing to respond to what was first described as a domestic dispute. Shaw's actions in those first minutes set the stage for a devastating hour that would forever alter the community. As the first gunshots echoed through the quiet streets of Faro, panic spread rapidly. The initial calls to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police described a domestic dispute, but by shortly after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, reports confirmed multiple shots had been fired in different locations. Neighbors fled indoors, locked their doors, and called loved ones to warn them of the active shooter. By 2:10 p.m., the town of Faro posted an urgent warning on its official social media page. There is an active shooter in Faro. Please stay home and lock your doors until further notice. Emergency alerts were also sent to cell phones across the Yukon, informing residents of the ongoing threat. The local school immediately went into lockdown to protect students, while community members anxiously watched the streets from windows. After shooting still-unsolved and targeting her partner, Ralph Shaw got back into his truck and drove to another residence in town. There, he confronted 73-year-old Patrick McCracken. The encounter began with a verbal argument over a perceived slight, but it quickly escalated. Shaw shot McCracken inside his own home, killing him. Authorities later described this act as impulsive and motivated by resentment, rather than any ongoing conflict. Within the span of roughly 1 hour, Shaw fired a total of 28 rounds from 2 different firearms, including a handgun and a rifle. He shot into buildings and across streets, displaying a complete disregard for the safety of anyone nearby. By the time police were closing in, Faro had transformed from a peaceful, remote community into a town gripped by fear, its residents traumatized by the sudden and violent events. As frantic 911 calls continued to pour in, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police moved swiftly to contain the threat. Officers were first on the scene within minutes and immediately began providing aid to the critically injured man who had been shot during the rampage. At another residence, they discovered the body of still-unsolved, confirming the devastating toll of the attacks. Police quickly established perimeters around key areas of Faro, including Harper Street, Yates Street, and the Tintina subdivision, urging residents to stay indoors. The community followed instructions closely as the reality of an active shooter in such a small town became apparent. Local authorities coordinated with officers from surrounding regions, ensuring that every approach road into the town was monitored. Within approximately 1 hour of the first shots being fired, at 1:56 p.m., RCMP officers located Ralph Bernard Shaw. He was arrested without resistance near the scene of the shootings, ending the immediate threat to the town. Shaw was taken into custody along with a tactical rifle, a handgun, and ammunition found in his truck. Officers also discovered a fanny pack containing a diamond ring, a passport, and roughly $53,000 in cash. Following the arrest, police went door to door to check on residents, confirming that 2 people had been killed and 1 critically injured. The town's planned mayoral ceremony for Jack Bowers, scheduled for that day, was postponed as the community grappled with the tragedy. The RCMP praised the quick cooperation of residents and the efficiency of their officers, noting that rapid response likely prevented further injuries and fatalities. In the days and weeks following the October 26, 2021 shootings, Faro was left in shock and mourning. The small town's tight-knit community felt the loss deeply, as residents grappled with both grief and fear. Homes and properties bore physical reminders of the rampage, including broken windows and other damage from stray gunfire. Candlelight vigils were held to honor the victims, and support networks from across the Yukon and Canada reached out to help the community heal. The legal process moved carefully but steadily. Ralph Bernard Shaw was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 2 counts of aggravated assault. He remained in custody while court proceedings were scheduled. Shaw's trial brought forward detailed accounts of his actions that day, including the shooting of Sengduan Honchayafum and Patrick McCracken, as well as the injury to Sang's partner. Witness testimony highlighted the bravery of neighbors who helped the critically injured man escape and the rapid response of the RCMP, which prevented further loss of life. On November 4th, 2024, 64-year-old Ralph Bernard Shaw pleaded guilty to first-degree murder for killing his estranged wife and second-degree murder for killing Patrick McCracken, as well as aggravated assault for injuring Sang's partner. During sentencing, over 20 victim impact statements were presented, describing the profound and lasting effects on families, friends, and the wider community. The court heard moving accounts of the victims' lives, emphasizing the love, generosity, and resilience they had shown within Faro. The court delivered Shaw's sentences on November 7th, 2024. For first-degree murder, he received life imprisonment with no chance of parole for 25 years. For second-degree murder, he received a concurrent life sentence, with no eligibility for parole for 17 and a half years. Given his age and poor health, it is extremely unlikely that he will ever be released. Despite the tragedy, Faro's community showed remarkable resilience. Neighbors cared for one another during the crisis, and local initiatives were established to support victims of domestic violence, inspired by Sang's bravery in leaving a controlling relationship. The legacy of that October day is both a somber reminder of the consequences of intimate partner violence and a testament to the courage and unity of a small town facing one of the Yukon's darkest days. William Patrick Fyfe was born in Toronto in 1955, but spent most of his childhood in Montreal, raised by his aunt after family difficulties. From a young age, he showed signs of restlessness and trouble following rules, often getting into minor trouble with the law and struggling with drug use. Despite this, he managed to learn a trade and became a skilled handyman and carpenter, earning a reputation in his neighborhood as someone dependable and hardworking. He also worked briefly as a drug counselor, presenting himself as a helpful member of the community while hiding a dark side no one suspected. Friends and neighbors described him as polite, quiet, and unassuming, a man who blended into everyday life, making his later crimes all the more shocking. By the late 1970s, he had already begun a pattern of violence that would go unnoticed for years. His early offenses were sporadic, and the long gaps between them made it nearly impossible for police to connect them at the time. While he lived a seemingly ordinary life, married, having a child, and maintaining steady work, he was quietly planning and committing crimes that would eventually span 2 decades, leaving families and investigators searching for answers. Throughout the 1980s, William Patrick Fyfe's attacks became more frequent and more violent, though police were still unaware that a single person was responsible. He targeted women who lived alone, often entering their homes without forced entry, suggesting he was familiar with the neighborhoods or had gained their trust. In 1987, Louise Blanc-Poupart was found murdered, and 2 years later, in 1989, Pauline LaPlante suffered a similar fate, leaving investigators puzzled and communities on edge. The pattern of attacks involved middle-aged women in quiet residential areas, and each crime left few clues behind, making it difficult to track the perpetrator. Police began to suspect that the cases might be linked, but without forensic evidence, there was no solid connection. Meanwhile, Fyfe continued his everyday life in Montreal, working as a handyman, interacting with neighbors, and presenting a normal public image. The late 1990s saw a sudden surge in his activity, culminating in a series of rapid murders in 1999, which finally drew the attention of a broader police task force. By this point, multiple law enforcement agencies were coordinating, realizing that they were dealing with a calculated predator whose crimes were escalating both in frequency and brutality. The turning point in the investigation came in December of 1999, Following the murder of 50-year-old Mary Glenn in her waterfront home, forensic teams meticulously examined the scene, collecting even the smallest traces of biological material. Among the evidence, a tiny sample was found on a door frame that would ultimately become crucial in solving the case. Canadian authorities ran the sample through the National DNA Database, and the result was a match to William Patrick Fyfe, whose prior record included petty theft and drug-related offenses, but no prior violent crimes. Suddenly, the man who had blended into his community for 2 decades had a name, and police could finally begin to connect him to a string of unsolved murders. Investigators learned that Fyfe had been traveling frequently between towns in Quebec, often returning to the areas where previous murders had occurred. Surveillance and background checks revealed his pattern of movements, establishing links between him and multiple crime scenes. The discovery of DNA evidence not only provided a suspect, but also gave law enforcement the key to piecing together the timeline of his long-hidden spree, bringing clarity to cases that had remained cold for nearly 20 years. On December 22nd, 1999, law enforcement finally caught up with William Patrick Fyfe at a truck stop just outside Barrie, Ontario. Officers had been monitoring his movements carefully, and the moment he touched the truck door handle, they moved in and placed him under arrest. Initially, he was questioned only about the murder of Mary Glenn, but investigators quickly realized the full scope of his crimes. Fyfe began to confess, revealing details of murders that had remained unsolved for years. Among the cases he admitted to were the killings of Suzanne Marie Bernier in October of 1979, Nicole Raymond later that same month, and Hazel Scatillon in March of 1981. His confessions helped police close cold cases that had baffled investigators for decades. Fyfe's calm demeanor during interrogations was chilling, showing no remorse, while providing vivid descriptions of the crimes. By the end of the questioning, authorities had a clear understanding of how extensive his violent acts had been, linking him to multiple victims across Quebec and confirming that his reign of terror spanned from 1979 to 1999. William Patrick Fyfe's trial began in early November of 2000, and he was formally charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. On September 21st, 2001, he was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The conviction brought relief to the families of his victims, who had spent decades waiting for answers, though it was a grim reminder of the senseless nature of his crimes. Fyfe was transferred to a psychiatric facility in Saskatchewan, where he remains in custody to this day. His confirmed victims included Suzanne Marie Bernier, Nicole Raymond, Hazel Scatillon, Louise Blanc-Poupard, and Mary Glenn. But he confessed to a total of 9 murders and is suspected in at least 5 more. The case highlighted the challenges of tracking a predator who blended seamlessly into communities, using trust and normalcy as a cover for horrific acts. Investigators emphasized the role of forensic science, particularly DNA evidence, in finally identifying and apprehending him, showing how critical it can be in solving cold cases. William Patrick Fyfe's story stands as a chilling example of how appearances can be deceiving and serves as a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers that can lurk behind ordinary facades.